Practice Makes Perfect by Neon Zangetsu, Chapter 9, Just a Little Lust. I won't tell you how to live your life, John. Grow up, find yourself a nice woman, and settle down, or don't, it's your choice. I can't make that choice for you. But how will I know when I meet the right one? What's the difference between love and lust? I mean, you and mom, ahem. Yes, that was certainly based off lust in the beginning. Well, I could explain, but that's something you need to learn on your own. Definitely, if I tell you any more, your mother will jump in, and I'm sure you don't want the details. Seriously, what kind of mystic mumbo jumbo is that? Throw me a bone here, old man. All right, I'll give you a hint. Love and hate are two sides of the same coin. Same goes with lust. And and that's it. Sometimes it's the girl who falls for you at first sight. Sometimes it's the one that hates your guts. Sometimes it's the one you least expect. Father and son, just a little lust. Naruto was no stranger to lust. You see, lust comes in many forms. He'd seen them all in his world, and this one, lust from knowledge, lust for power, lust for recognition from one's peers, even lust for love. Lust was a little bit like greed in that regard. Just about everyone knows it. Well, he knew more love than lust at this point, but the saying still stuck. Naruto Uzumaki loved the Juniper arc just as she loved him. They were madly in love and also lust. Perhaps it's something that happens when two blondes get together, maybe wires cross somewhere, or stars align in the heavens, that sort of thing. Who can say? Regardless, the two of them utterly madly without restraint when it came to their life together, to say nothing of more intimate matters. How else do you think they could have so many children with no signs of stopping at that? So yes, he could understand what it was to feel strongly for someone and how powerful those feelings might be, but at the end of the day, whatever one might say, Juniper was more than enough for him. His gaze did not waver, his eyes did not rove, because he felt no need to. One was better than two in his mind, any more than that, and he'd surely go mad. Likewise, he tried to steer his offspring in the same direction, wouldn't do over running a remnant, and, for the most part, he felt he succeeded. For the most part. The ghost of a smile touched his lips as he scribbled another line in his journal. Went through Pietro's ledger again today, he murmured to himself, words rising over the faint scrick, scrick, scrick of his pen. Narrowed a few names down, his mouth pursed in a frown as a thought occurred to him, a suspicion that was swiftly jotted down. Sneeze might be involved in the attack. A query followed that statement. Ironwood innocent? He drew a line under it before writing below. Still looking for John. Not in Vacuo or Atlas. Might need to keep an eye on the kids, especially. A faint bang from upstairs distracted him, and then, "Look at below, Pops!" Kurama scoffed in his head. Speak of the devil. Naruto's right arm snapped up without so much as a backward glance. Lazily catching the object before it could strike the back of his skull, he whipped it around to hold it before his face, considering it with a keen eye. Strange little device, almost looked like a mechanical monkey of some sort. He didn't turn at first, if only because doing so would have revealed his smile. Instead, he set the pen down and laid his free hand on the table. Blue eyes alighted upon the window and beheld a bright shock of dyed azure hair in its reflection just behind him. He tutted softly and shook his head twice. "Making explosives again, are we, Powder?" A soft gasp reached his ears, telling him he was right on the mark. "No." Firm fingers glided over the mechanism and peeled it apart. "What have I told you about these?" A cheeky slip of a girl stared at her toes. "To do it outside." Naruto quirked a brow. "And he heard a little shoe scuff against the floor. "To only use them on Grim. That's my girl." With a flick of his fingers, the would-be incendiary device sailed up into the air to tumble end over end. For a moment it hung aloft before gravity had its say. He let it land, then spin merely on one finger before batting back into his palm. She really did have a talent. Still, this was mostly harmless as it was now. An explosion was hardly going to hurt anyone in the Ark family. They were made of sterner stuff than most. A lazy, underhanded throw sent the toy hurtling her way. He heard his daughter scuttle forward to catch it, and finally pivoted in the chair to face her fully. Her pale, hopeful face stared up at him, cheeks pinching in a frown. She wasn't his blood, not like the others, but he didn't regret that fateful day, nor taking her in, even for a second. They'd found her dying in a ditch and nursed her back to health. The Ark family was his, after all. If he wanted to adopt the odd urchin here and there, he certainly could. Juniper certainly didn't mind. Finally, she found her voice. "So, you're not mad?" "Why would I be?" He patted her head. You have a gift. Use it. The teeniest smile bloomed. Her eyes flitted to the table and his messy notebook. What you writing? Nothing you need worry about. Naruto kissed her forehead, then laughed when she squirreled away. Go play with your sisters, and remember, he pulled back and flicked her toy with a wink. It's our little secret. Besides, he leaned against his chair. If you want to see a really big explosion, just ask me. She perked up. Really? Sure. Ask me in a few days and I'll set something up. Okay. She darted forward, gave him a quick hug, burying her head in his chest. Naruto waved her off with a smile. Go on now. Don't let your mother catch you with that. And she squirted outside with a giggle. Thanks, Papa. Kurama scoffed. Softy. The wayward warrior shrugged and returned to his notes as the pleasant sounds of laughter echoed forth from the yard. Life was good now if he could just track down his equally wayward son. John's call had been a mite bit grainy the other day, but he'd seen enough to draw his own conclusions. A quick check of the student roster merely confirmed it. Unlike Mr. Unveil, Shade and Atlas were known to display the names of their would-be huntsmen most proudly. If Atlas had John, they would have negotiated from a position of strength rather than send a squad after his family. Moreover, his son had always hated cold climates. He wouldn't last a day in the desert on his own, which left Miss Vale each problems in their own right. Naruto was fairly certain she had Haven wrapped around her little finger, while he held Beacon firmly in hand. One academy was practically right next door, not even a day's run for him. The other was clearly across the world. He could send a clone to one and investigate the other. He shrugged and kept writing, muttering out his notes as he did. Talk to Terra, a pause followed by a quick note near the bottom. Seems nice. Saffron's girlfriend had been an unexpected surprise, all things considering, but at the end of the day, it was her life to live. So long as she was happy, so too was he. After all, he looked into her. Much to his chagrin, Terra wasn't an Elysian spy, a foreign plant, or even some ne'er-do-well hoping to strike it rich on the secret of chakra. She was, all things considered, a perfectly normal girl with her aura unlocked. Even her semblance wasn't particularly noteworthy. She could harden her skin to deflect damage. Her record was utterly ordinary. Nothing squeaky clean, mind you, which would have drawn suspicion of a different sort. Just a few misdemeanors here and there, an arrest for protesting against fondness abuse. Nothing more. If she was to believe the Saffron had been the one to bumble into her. Believable. He jotted another note down. Seems like something she'd do. Something you'd do, more like. True, Saffron did take after him, his little Supergirl, always charging head first into danger, leaping first and asking questions later. Thankfully, none of her siblings had shown any romantic inclinations just yet. Valen had no interest in anything other than her training, likely because anyone she met failed to meet the Herculean standards she'd set. She wanted someone strong, but also one who would also pamper her, someone able to best her in battle, yet in the same vein no so proud as to deny defeat. Sabrina and Sable were likewise extremely choosy, all but refusing to interact with anyone outside of the family. Jean was too young to understand such things, and likewise Azula was more likely to burn a boy as look at them. To say nothing of Powder, she was more interested in her toys than anything else. She'd make a fine arc once he trained her up. Maybe a bit of chakra would help. Penny was well, Penny, his granddaughter, would be fine. After all, she too was an exception. When he'd first met Pietro all those years ago, he'd been little more than a man with a dream, a scientist down on his luck. He'd taken him in, given him a bit of instruction, a nudge in the right direction, followed by a few drops of his own precious blood and chakra, all with no expectations of a reward or any real result. And now, surprise, surprise, years later, he had a grandchild. Naruto cocked a weathered eye at the thought of her. No, at his granddaughter. By the log, it felt weird to say that. He and Juniper had often contemplated the idea of grandchildren in the future, just not quite this soon. But she'd been made from his chakra and Pietro's aura. Paladina, who had been like a son to him in all but name, Penny was his daughter, thus his granddaughter. What else could she possibly be? She'd slotted right into their little family. Even now, you could hear her laughter just outside. Silly girl, she was probably tormenting Valen again. And then they came to the black sheep of the family. Kurama grimaced. You mean John? I do. Naruto sighed and tapped a finger against the table. Ah, but John, John. He was so proud of him, and yet so very, very worried. He needed to find which academy he'd gone to. He's got two girls on his team, the timeless warrior muttered to himself as he scribbled down another note in his journal. What am I going to do with that boy? The pen snapped in his hand, spattering the page with ink so dark it almost looked like blood. I don't even know where he is. A few notions struck him even as he snatched up another. Wait, he flicked the thought inward. Kerma, you've kept in contact with him, right? A noise of consent confirmed his suspicion. Great, then you can save me some time. Where'd he run off to? The kitsune clamped right up. Indeed, his silence proved telling. Naruto sighed into it. You're not going to tell me, are you? He's doing well, that's all I'll say. Cheeky little furball. Kerma. Sorry, he didn't sound apologetic, not one bit. This is for the best. Your brat needs a chance to spread his wings and learn. I'll be there to keep an eye on him. Speaking of which, a hand laid itself on his and broke the link. Daydream again, dear? I'll leave you to it. Have fun. Oi, I'm not done with you. Silence reigned. Naruto craned his neck up to find green eyes close to his, framed by a blond hair and a coy smile. His lips parted to speak, and Juniper silenced them with her own. His brain blanked for a moment as he inhaled flexively, the brief lapse of which gave her the chance to slide into his lap. The chair creaked beneath their combined weight. He barely noticed because her hands were threading through his hair, breasts crushing against his chest, hips grinding against his through the fabric of their clothes. He realized what she was getting at a moment later and drew back. You're trying to distract me, he frowned a little. Aren't you? That depends. His wife chased him with her lips, breath hitching softly between lingering kisses. Is it working? The girls are right outside, he muttered as her hands began to play with the buttons of his shirt. For the most part, she cooed between kisses. They're carving. The blonde brow rose. Carving what exactly? She winked. You'll see for yourself. For a fleeting moment he considered resisting, then he looked at her again. Even after all these years, Juniper Ark was just as lovely as he remembered. No, even more so. Perhaps it had something to do with all the time they'd spent together, laid together, all their children. Maybe fate was finally smiling on him. Truth be told, Naruto didn't know or care. His arms tightened around her waist, drawing her close. You're about to see a whole lot more. Her smile was all teeth. As I recall, I was on top last time. She knew just what to say to rile him up. That's about to change. The door clattered open behind them before Juniper could hope to respond. Grandfather, a familiar voice called. Grandmother, look what I made. Naruto slumped with a sigh. Juniper didn't budge from his lap, though she did roll her hips against him one last time to ease him further. He bit back a groan. Sneaky succubus, leaving him dry like that. Still, there was nothing he could do. He daren't move, if only because he couldn't trust his legs to carry him at the moment. Penny knew none of this. She darted forward and held up her creation for him to inspect. Look, grandfather, did I make it properly? She held up the fruits of her labor, a fine wooden carving in the shape of a nine-tailed fox. Naruto reached over and traced his thumb over it, admiring the craftsmanship. He looked away, face gone red. Too adorable, must protect. My sweet, precious girl. Juniper was less subtle. She all but dove on her. Naruto watched with a smile. Maybe he could give John a few more days, so long as his son held back. There was nothing to worry about. He wasn't holding back. Weiss knew it at the first brush of their blades, felt the telltale flicker of dread when she and John crossed weapons for a second, then third time, followed by a fourth and a fifth. Each exchange left her arms screaming, shoulders aching as shock waves slammed down on her arms. Not even 5 minutes of this, and already her fingers had gone nearly numb against Merternaster's grip. Merely blocking was the physical effort in and of itself, one that took more and more from her with each pass. Really, she had no one to blame but herself. In hindsight, she really should have known better than to engage Archer in a contest of brute strength, but she was just so terribly cross with him at the moment. Instead, like some ranked amateur, she let that fury cloud her judgment. Anger had her standing her ground when she really shouldn't have. Anger got her nearly overpowered immediately. A broad sweep of his blazing blue saber sent her stumbling away. What's wrong? He gave his blade a flourish, sending it thrumming through the air. I thought you wanted to fight. Weiss brittled. "Why you?" Sparks flew as Ark's plasma weapon slammed into Mertonester. A tiny gasp tore past her lips. Even at low power, his weapon threatened to shear clear through hers. Had it a voice, her rapier would have shrieked in pain. Weiss nearly did when that blade swept across her hand. Hot, it burned. She recoiled, pivoted to no avail. Taking his blade in both hands, John planted his feet, grit his teeth, and pushed her blade back. Weiss leaned with it, knees buckling under the onslaught. There were no jokes or jabs now, only cold, searing intent. Azure orbs met startled ice blue. One of her legs buckled and her balance faltered. She heard her team gasp before her, even as Juniper cheered to lead her on. All the while, she was forced down, down, down. "I'm sorry." John sounded almost contrite as she fell to a knee. "This is the part where you lose." He wasn't even being cruel about it. That made it so much worse. Did he think her weak? She hadn't even begun to fight. Frantic, she slammed an elbow up at his groin, only to find herself blocked by one of his greaves. A faint hiss pushed past her lips when he redoubled his efforts and pushed her back further. "Think, Weiss, think!" She flailed for a solution as her muscles quivered. "What do you have that he doesn't?" The gods were good, for the answer came to her almost immediately. Range. For all his speed and strength, Ark had already revealed his hand, showing himself to be a close combat fighter. Time and time again, he sought to close the distance between them and strike. She'd played his game out of anger, but now, with the odds against, she realized that was a mistake. She did not have to fight like a berserker, nor was she bound by such convenient limitations. Time to fight like a Schnee. In a rare lapse of decorum, Weiss took one hand from her rapier's hilt and flicked two trembling fingers at his serene visage. Mertonester clicked furiously as she brought a fresh dusk cylinder to bear. A solid white glyph smashed John right in the nose. Hard light dust burning through the air to strike him head on the screen above. His aura barely budged. The same could not be said for his body. He staggered back on reflex, startled by the brash maneuver. Weiss let him take 3 steps, weapon raised before her face, and whirled. "Yah!" With a triumphant cry, she flicked her rapier cylinders. Fire dust clicked in. Her fingers moved anew, trailing red light as they kissed the cold steel. The moment she reached the rapier's peak, she stepped forth and flung a wave of fire dust in his face. It struck Ark head on and exploded, leaving him coughing harshly. He waved a plume of smoke away from his visage. Now she took the chance to surge forward and strike at his knees. She'd knocked him off his feet and end this in a single blow. That would show him. A low growl pierced the haze. Blue burned gold in the smoke. It was her only warning. Weiss dropped a glyph and kicked off it with all her might. Even then she wasn't fast enough. Blazing light filled her vision and she twisted, her spine all but parallel with the ground as that blazing bar of blue light whistled over her head. A few stray strands of white hair fluttered to the ground, leaving her to swear at the near miss. Then he was on her again, forcing her back, back, back once more, driving her through a dizzying array of glyphs and kicks just to evade too close. John wasn't trying to kill her, and frankly he couldn't with her aura up, but it would hurt all the same. She realized her mistake a moment later. Admirable as her acrobatics were, her last leap had carried her just a touch too far, leaving her wide open. John was many things, but he wasn't a fool when it came to combat. He leaped up to meet her, caught her by the right ankle. She had half an instinct to balk. That was no mere leap. "You can fly?" John beamed. "Nope. Jump good." Then he yanked. Pain flared in her leg, pain that was eclipsed as he whipped her into the mat face first, like some ragged doll. Weiss scarcely had time to yelp before she struck the ground, a yelp that turned into a scream of pain as stars flashed before her vision. Distantly she heard Ruby's cry, "Weiss!" "Not now, you." She tried to speak only for her body to betray her. All she managed was a raspy gasp as she curled in on herself. Oh gods, the pain! It felt like he'd cracked one of her ribs. Her fingers touched her nose and came away red. But how? Horror was still up. She could feel it. You couldn't just cut through it. "That a boy, Johnny!" Nora hollered encouragements over her muted whimper. "Show that silly Schnee who's boss." In the corner of her eye, Gulwich began to raise her weapon. "Miss Schnee, are you unable to continue?" Pride sparked back to life in her chest, and she slapped a closed fist against the mat. I can still fight. She wouldn't be defeated like this. No, nay, never. To surrender now after such a horrid showing, she'd never live it down. Laughter echoed in her ears, imagined or otherwise. John hesitated in her peripherals, golden eyes shimmering back to blue. Maybe you should stop. Anger knotted in her stomach. Shut your mouth. This isn't over. Miss Goodwitch sighed. Then stand, Mishni, wasted and gasping for air. Weiss nevertheless found the strength to claw her way on her knee. Her body fought her every step of the way. Muscles creaked, bones ached. She raised her head and stole a glance at the scoreboard above, balked at what she found there. It couldn't be. Look again, her mind cried. We are, answered her eyes. It's real. Much to her chagrin, her aura was wallen the yellow, while Ark's remained a healthy green. Shame stung her like a swarm of angry rapier gasps. She had worked for this, earned her place in Beacon, and yet this cheery fool was making a fool of her. It was, by any and all accounts, a clear accounting of their skills. Her fingers bit into the mat as she growled. The world held its breath. As you wish. At length their instructor complied, though the look Weiss received proved absolutely scathing. However, this match will end once either of ours reach the red. Am I clear? Weiss nodded. Crystal, ma'am. Miss Goodwitch stepped back. You may continue. John flicked a reluctant look at her. Do we have to? Look, I'll forfeit. There's no need to. All the world went red. A line of white glyphs sent Weiss surging forward at unnatural speed. Merton Astor rammed forward. She crashed into him at speeds driving him back half of space. Her sole reward was a grunt. Continue. Ark finished with a sigh, lowering his shield. I'm sorry. Did I say something to offend you? Offend me? Her forehead smashed against his. Your existence offends me. His right foot shifted just so, more than enough to spook her. Kicking off his shield, she paraded away, careened off another glyph, and landed at the edge of the ring. Mertonester trailed a wave of hard frost in the air as only she could. A flick of the wrist sent a wave of jagged icicles hurtling his way. That a girl, Weiss? Ruby hollered her support for the briefest statement. Represent Team Ruby. John turned a puzzled expression on her. I thought you were cheering for me. Her teammate qualled a look at left and now right. Go both of you. You hurt her. Yanked them the fist down. Fight! Pyra hollered her support. Be brave, John. Weiss bridled as the boy actually turned his back on her to frown at the stance. I don't think bravery's the problem here. She slammed into him with a shriek, abandoning finesse entirely. Merton Astor met the blazing blade of Corsair Morse time and time again with a wild waltz of light and steel. More than once he crashed through her guard as if it weren't even there. A vicious kick caught her ribs and hurtled her to the ground. Her aura plummeted that much more. John didn't give her a chance to feel the pain, much less rise to catch her breath. An overhead swing hammered down as she rolled aside, and a line of fire burst forth, nearly catching her ponytail as she tumbled aside. It was too much. He pursed relentlessly, using nothing more than sheer bloody strength and speed to overwhelm her, forcing her to disengage yet further. Skipping backwards like a frightened child, he closed the distance all too quickly. A stray blow caught her tiara and tore it in half, freeing her hair from its ponytail. It blew down into her face at once, eliciting a snarl. Huh! John hesitated. Corsair Morse touched the floor, eliciting a sizzling hiss. You look kinda nice with your hair down. In the background, Yang gave a low whistle. Smooth move there, Whiskers. Weiss felt her face flame upright, embarrassment pink. How dare... He surged forward, and something in her recoiled despite her best effort to stay strong. Distance. She must put some distance between them. There was a way to beat him. There has to be a mistake, some weakness he had, an accident she could exploit, something, anything. Whoa, those really were bright eyes. She threw herself to one side as his blade swept in at her ribs. It racked her thigh instead. Pain blossomed there, but still she fought on in spite of it, whirling to meet him anew. Her aura plummeted anew as they traded blows. Ark fought well, too well. His blade blurred in at various angles, and his agility left him near impossible to track. For every blow she landed he dealt two more. All her training, all her skill, all her everything meant nothing before a foe like this. Weiss knew herself well, knew her skills better than anyone else. She already knew her limits. She was beginning to fear the outcome, that she wouldn't be able to win. It gnawed at her. Never had the gap between her and another became more apparent than it was now. No, not a gap. This was a chasm. It didn't make any sense. A frustrated scream tore out of her as Merton glanced off his shield. Less so when said shield bashed her in the face. She stumbled away, clutching at her nose. She was the Schnee. She'd given her body and soul to her training. She had sacrificed and bled and sacrificed to get where she was now. So why was she losing to some country bumpkin? How? The word tore out of her as she flicked a fresh wave of ice at him. How are you this strong? I'm really not. John evaded and allowed himself a smile, utterly at his ease, seemingly the first real smile he'd felt in quite some time. But if you want an answer, he thumbed his chin, considering her words for a moment, and finally shrugged. Push-ups, sit-ups, and plenty of juice. Whites felt her right eye begin to twitch anew. Juice! Blake leaned forward just so. Here it comes. Everyone face-palmed. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. She thrust forward in a blind rage, aiming for his center mass. Two fingers flicked out and pinched, catching her rapier's thin point before it could pierce one of his joints. His fist closed around it fully and trapped the metal against the firm fingers. You really should stop. His words were her father's all over again. I don't want to hurt you. Hurt her? He'd wounded her pride well past repair, dealt her courage a fatal blow, maimed her dignity beyond recognition. I was meant for this. Tears pricked at her eyes as she snarled up at him. His words further stalked the fury in her soul as she struggled to extricate her weapon anew. I trained for this, threw myself into it, mastered it my senses. Where did you train, Ark? On a farm? The blond boy blinked. Yes. Pyra stifled a smile against her palm. Weiss drove a knee into his shin. When he moved to defend, she tore her rapier free and stabbed down, rendering the ring a glossy sheet beneath their feet. It was a good move, a timeless classic that hadn't failed her before. He should have slipped and fallen, but he didn't. He laughed and all but skated across, somehow moving faster despite the unstable terrain. Why were his feet glowing? Weiss backpedaled. Too little too late. No, stay back, stay. Clenched knuckles slammed into her stomach and blasted the breath from her lungs. Physically lifting her feet from the floor, Weiss felt her aura plummet. A spittle sprayed from her lips. Her body folded with a whimper as her knees hit the mat soon thereafter. Merton fell from her fingers and clattered to the mat. Time slowed to a crawl. Someone cried out. She wasn't sure who. Weak, a nasty little voice whispered in the back of her head. No. Useless. Just like father said. No. No. Nothing like your sister. No. 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 I'm sorry. Ark's hilt came crashing down to deliver the knockout blow. Something snapped deep inside Weiss. No, perhaps that wasn't it. She felt a pierce of herself click into place, and quite suddenly she understood. Ark! An ice glyph burst beneath her, the sheer force of which drove her foe back 3 steps, and just like that, something came through. A giant armed man forged of white hoarfrost tore its way into existence, breached the surface of the glyph with an awful hiss. As she looked on in awe, it landed, planted itself upon the mat for balance, and leveled itself upright. With its passing came another arm, followed by a pair of broad shoulders, a neck, a head, then finally the main torso itself. John stepped back. This is new. In no time at all, it loomed larger over them both, casting both combatants in its stellar shadow. Only then could she truly take it in. Her new ally wore a medieval suit of armor, easily twice as tall as she, its visor dark as the blackest shadow, glistening with white on blue frost. It called forth a sword and brought it to bear in her defense, warding her foe away. Weiss felt her lips part, forming a small round oval of surprise. As she looked on, the knight planted its blade in the ground, knelt before her, actually knelt, and offered her a giant hand. She flinched, recalling an unpleasant memory, if only for a moment. Fortunately, her fingers were quick to betray her. They curled around the giant digit and allowed it to help her stand. You! The knight bowed its head yet further. Weiss recognized it at once. How could she not? It was the very foe, that blasted Armagigas she defeated not long ago back in the manor, the same implacable enemy she'd bested at her father's behest, and in doing so won the right to attend Beacon. But why was it here? Unless realization dawned, her semblance, she'd finally made a breakthrough. John looked up with a wry expression of awe. Wow, that's certainly something. It is. It is, isn't it? She pivoted to face him on trembling legs, grimaced for a moment at her faltering aura reserves, then rallied. I'd understand if you want to surrender. Behind her, the Armagigas rose to its full towering height. Please surrender, a little voice whimpered in the back of her head. Everything's spinning. Her eyes flicked back up to the scoreboard. After the beating she'd taken, that little breakthrough just now had left her aura nearly in the red. Even now she could feel it plummeting. If she didn't finish this soon, she'd be the loser by default. Semblance or no, maybe she didn't have to win. He was clearly impressed by the sight of her summons, and his back was to said broad. If she could just press the advantage, intimidate him to give up the bout, just give up before I kill over. Nah, his smile shattered any hope she might have had. I think I've changed my mind. There was something different about his smile now, a wild edge that hadn't been there before. I didn't know you were hiding in Ace like this. He tilted his head just so. You're pretty amazing after all. Weiss brindled again with the compliments. Was he really? No. There wasn't any time. She needed to act now, before she passed out. She flicked a thought at her summons and prayed it wasn't a fluke. The night moved accordingly, readying itself and leaping forward, all but devouring the distance in a single bound. Its speed startled even her. Had it always been so agile? Whatever the case, it closed the gap well before John Ark could rush in again. Behind it, Weiss dove on Myrtanaster, retrieving her trusty weapon, and clambered to her feet. As such, she raised her gaze just in time to see her knight strike. Its blade slammed down in a single overhand sweep. John's right arm rose to intercept. Frost sprayed upward. Weiss flung up an arm against it, squinting in the haze that followed, a mist that blinked both combatants and spectators alike. It cleared almost immediately, but the damage had been done. She saw. He tanked it on his shield. His aura definitely took a hit, and the metal had suffered for it, warped and cracked before the sheer cold of the knight's blade. She supposed she should be grateful for that. If he'd caught it beforehand, she would have lost her mind. Never mind that. She shouldn't be standing at all. Uh, a threadbare whisper pushed past her lips as he continued to stand tall. What are you? His smile was pure as the glistening snow. Just a normal student like you. Normal, she muttered, and I'm the queen of the grim. Really? He blinked a bit at that. You cannot be serious. Bzzzt! A bell rang. Weiss looked up, terribly startled, but already knowing what she'd find there. Her aura had finally reached the red. No, beyond that, it was virtually gone. But his, she'd finally brought him into the yellow. The faintest smile creased her pale face. With it went the last of her strength. She slumped to her knees, hair covering her face, legs sprawled out beneath her. Her knight planted its blade and fizzled out behind her. In place of anger, she felt only exhaustion. No, perhaps that wasn't quite true. Something strange and unfamiliar itched at her chest. It felt like respect. She pitched forwards. Whoa there! Her head landed in Ark's arm as he caught her. Embarrassment blazed through her anew. She pawed at him weakly for a moment and succeeded only in entangling herself with him further. Her good arm slammed at his chest to no avail. Had she the strength, she would have struck him in the leg for holding her as such. As it was, she managed little more than uncoordinated filling. Enough. Hazily blue eyes flickered up to meet his. I yield. Miss Goodwitch reacted instantly. John Ark wins by merit of forfeit. Really? John regarded her with a sigh as the buzz of conversation rose around them. I wanted to go a little longer. A strange noise bloomed in the air. It took Weiss a long moment to realize it was laughter. Her laughter. When was the last time she laughed? She couldn't recall. Perhaps it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was all that aura she'd lost. She didn't know. It didn't care. Everything felt so heavy. She couldn't keep her eyes open. Her head felt fuzzy. Did she have a conscience? Still, Ark really did have nice arms, firm and strong, all corded muscles. He held her gently, despite having no reason to do so. She rather liked that. Definitely a conscience. Either way, she wasn't satisfied. Not completely. This isn't over, Ark. John scratched his cheek with a long finger. I think it is, though. It most certainly is not. She tried to stifle a yawn. To no avail. Mark my words. I will have my revenge. She'd tank his hide next time. Once her aura recovered, once she mastered her awakened semblance, she'd show him. Normal. Her pale face flushed anew. You really aren't normal at all, Ark. John! Ruby slammed into his back before he could respond. Give me your sword. She recoiled, and the moment was lost. For now. Ruby, what? Wait just a second. Hey, don't grab me. Ruby, yes. The little weapon addict giggled, all but reaching over his shoulders. And show me more. Show me. Show me. Yang shrugged. You brought this on yourself. She's never going to stop now until you give up the goods now. Ruby made a keening noise and rounded on her. Yang, don't say it like that. It was all too much. Wise closed her eyes and surrendered to her body. Sleep now. Deal with this madness later. Much later. Normal, Ark had said. She'd see about that. Quite the show, wouldn't you say? Glinda hummed non-comically as she and Port watched two teams hoist the exhausted Schnee between them. It certainly was. Her lips pursed as she considered John Ark anew. Semblances aside, there's something about that boy, something familiar, almost as if he's nonsense, my dear. Peter clamped her on the back, distracting her at last. You must be imagining things. Was she? She didn't think she was. Ark's fighting style ranged from e- eclectic to outright explosive. Could that be his semblance? He'd moved with frightful speed, tanked hits he had no business enduring, and recovered far, far too quickly, to say nothing of his skill with the blade. She'd seen that sword style somewhere before, but where? A faint pressure blossomed in the back of her head, bringing forth a mild migraine as she dwelt upon it further. She winced. Or had she seen that form? A young woman appeared in her mind's eye, dancing with a blade. She had green eyes and flowing blonde hair. She smiled at her. You're getting sloppy, Glinda. The memory slipped through her grasp when she reached for it. Too much oil and water. Bah! She shook off the sudden malaise that followed. If it really was that important, she'd remember sooner or later. Yes, she reeled after a moment. I suppose you're right. She touched a hand to her brow. It's been a long day, and I'm tired. Good afternoon, Peter. Port wavered after her. Give James my regards. Peter waited until she rounded the corner. Only then did he smile. Nothing personal, dear girl, he muttered to himself when she was gone. I'm afraid I can't let you spill the beans just yet. A spark of something flashed through his oft-closed eyes as he opened them, mustache lifted open above his smile. After all, you'd spoil all my fun, and then I wouldn't get to see him dance. Peter Port whistled a merry little tune as he waltzed off. It promised to be an interesting year. What fun! What fun! Previews. Naruto turned to face the shadows. How long are you going to skulk about? Something stirred. Pyra, are you mad? No, she looked away. Whatever gave you that idea? Osmond considered the footage, rewound it, considered it again. Did the Ark boy have magic? He didn't want to consider it, and yet the notion persisted. Those skills went beyond a mere semblance. They defied the realm of possibility, of imagination itself. Had he not had children after Salem, before he had split his power, before the maidens? He certainly had. He thought that bloodline long extinguished. His mug fell from his fingers and clattered to the floor. In the end, only one thought occurred to Ozpin. Does this make me a great-grandfather? Let me go. Blast you. I want to be alone. He had far too many sisters not to know that lie. No, I don't think you do. People really should talk to other people every day. John held her close, despite her struggles, even if it's just small talk. Otherwise, their hearts grew dark and sullen. His arms tightened around her, not harmful nor firm, but gentle all the same. Talking to others builds bonds of friendship and relationships. It broadens the mind and it makes you feel grateful to be alive. That's the kind of creatures we humans are. So, he swallowed a little. Talk to me. I know we don't know each other very well, but I want to help. She sniffed into his shoulder. You're just full of wisdom, aren't you? Nah, my dad told me those words. He beamed. They fit, right? Tears burned her eyes, a crack in her resolve. Maybe a little. You can cry if you want. I won't tell anyone. She warbled, and the floodgates opened. It's just not fair. Oh, what fun, what fun. It's been a while since I tried. Who are you, really? Peter tilted merely as they traded blows. I'm just the teacher. This is an absolute rule, John. You're forbidden from using this form unless you have no other choice. Do you understand? The same rule applies to your sisters. I've sealed that knowledge and power from them. It didn't quite take with you, which is why we're having this conversation in the first place. An arm swept outwards, 9 scarlet tails waving behind it. Kerma and I refined this form, mastered it over the years of careful practice through thick and thin, but even now it carries an inert limit. A single clawed finger rose. 1 minute. The words rang through the clearing like a bell. That's the threshold even for me. Baryon mode amplifies everything tenfold. His fist, the scythe outwards, casually flattening an Urso with no known, then a flick of his wrist. Strength, speed, stamina makes you damn near untouchable. Another blow destroyed the ground behind it, obliterating the swarm with one punch. After that comes the risk. Risk? He gulped, reliving the memory. And what happens after a minute? Glowing scarlet eyes met his. You die? Hello, dear brother. Bright eyes met his across the room. Enjoying our vacation? She took a deep, hearty bite off her apple. Are we? John choked. Of all the people to visit. Hey, sis. I told you to stop. Naruto blew out an irritated breath. This is pointless. He reared up, smashed their heads down again. You're not winning this fight. A blade flashed out at him, piercing his stomach. He looked down, frowned, sighed. Is that all? End of chapter 9.